Hello, I'm Dan Cook with Bone Zone, and welcome to another episode of Ortho Innovators, sponsored by Tecomet. Today I'm thrilled to talk with Dr. Lali Sekhon, a practicing neurosurgeon and founder and CEO of SpinePoint, which developed the innovative Flexi spinal cages. Dr. Sekhon, thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, Dan, thank you for having me on. My pleasure.
So we'll dive into the Flexi technology in a bit, but first I wanted to ask you about your clinical background as a neurosurgeon and why that led you to found SpinePoint.
Yeah, I'm a practicing neurosurgeon. My specialty is spine. I've been doing neurosurgery now. I think I did sounds horrible, but I did my first bull hole in 1988. So I've been around a while. And in terms of spine, it's relatively young. And when I got into spine surgery, we had no ACDF plates. We used threaded bone dowel grafts. We were using wires. We were using hooks and rods. So I've had the pleasure of watching the transition of everything that's come through. I'm about 10,000 cases in, and one of the things I noticed was that there were issues in spine surgery, and there are a lot of issues in spine surgery that we weren't solving. And so when I looked at any widget that we used, the focus most companies have is on making sure the index procedure goes well, as they should. And you want to make sure everything goes well. The challenge is, as you look at the breadth of what we do, about 1 in 4 of our patients don't do so well from surgery. Some of it is poor indications. Some of it is adjacent segment disease where they wear out the next level. Some of it is the implants don't stay where they should, so you get subsidence and sinkage. Some of it is our patients don't fuse, and even with things like BMP, our fusion rates aren't 100%. So there are problems that happen downstream, which I saw as a surgeon and said, well, look, we're getting poor outcomes in, up to a quarter of our patients. How can we improve the outcome? And that's really where it started thinking about what can I do? What can we make to try to mitigate some of these problems that happen downstream?
That's great. And tell me a little bit about the development of the Flexi implants. They have an innovative design. They're 3D printed.
Right.
Tell me about the process of working through those
Sure.
art design ideas.
Initially the desire was to get something between fusions over here and arthroplasty over here, something in the middle, something that wasn't as stiff as a fusion, but maybe was more constrained than an arthroplasty. And that's where the idea came from. And so we started looking at materials, started looking at stiffness. As you know, stiffness and modulus elasticity, from an engineering point of view, they're different things, but that relationship with bone and the environment is so important. And so it's really trying to find something in the middle. And if you could find something in the middle that was friendly to the bone, the rationale was maybe our fusion rates are better, maybe we get less sinkage of the devices into bone, and maybe we get less stresses on the next levels in adjacent segment disease. So it really was a search to find a device that wasn't as rigid as a fusion, was for people who aren't artificial disc candidates. As we all age, most of us age out. The average age is 42 for an artificial disc, and something that was a little bit friendlier in the environment with bone.
Yeah, can you compare that stiffness or lack of stiffness to some of the other implants on the market, perhaps, and natural bone?
So this is how we split it up. There's modulus elasticity, which is a material property. If you look at titanium, it's around 110 gigapascals. If you look at cortical bone, it's 17. If you look at cancellous bone, it's like 0.3. So that range from 0 to 17 is our bone environment. So titanium is really stiff. And if you move away from titanium to something like PEEK, you can get it down to 4. But as you know, PEEK has been less than perfect and we moved away from it. And so you don't want to lose the material advantages of porous titanium. And we managed to, through the Z shape, having porous titanium, get our modulus elasticity down to 1. And so it's right next to the cancellous bone zone. But the other important part of it is it's not just modulus elasticity, which is a material property, it's stiffness. And we also managed to get the stiffness down to corticocancellous bone. And part of it is you can change materials. So if you use PEEK, you can certainly get down there. But if you want the advantages of porous titanium, which seem to be the current thing in spine surgery, the fusion rates are good, then you really have a much stiffer device than you're going to get in corticocancellous bone. So it's that Z shape, and it's getting low modulus, and low stiffness to match what that corticocancellous bone environment is.
Can you tell me about that Z shape? How did you come up with that? It's just a very interesting design and
So,
very.
yeah, I had two partners very early on, about 2005, and we had a slightly different design on it. And I'll give credit to the original partners for thinking of that Z shape. And it really was a spring, and we used to call it a spring disc. And originally we envisaged just the Z shape without any porous titanium around it. Here's an interesting story. That Z shape has been used in Taiwan for about 15 years. And we had patent protection everywhere in the world, but not in Taiwan. And so the Z shape actually got marketed by a company in Taiwan and has been there. In the US, when we looked at bringing the Z shape into the US, you needed to get an IDE done. And it was regarded as a motion sparing device. So by having a passive veil of porous titanium around the Z shape, we kept the Z shape's springness, but we're able to take the 510K process and essentially convert it into a cage. So we got the advantages of porous titanium fusion rates, but having that Z shape acting as a mechanical spring to reduce the stiffness and the modulus. So again, that original idea was something between fusion devices and arthroplasty, semi-constrained, and it kind of went from there.
And I saw that you had, I think it's 12 iterations before you brought it to the FDA.
It's hard.
Oh,
Yeah, and
go ahead.
no, Dan, it's hard. The FDA, for cervical, they publish what their static and mechanical testing protocols are. They're out there, they're published. They're pretty aggressive on cervical because a failure in the cervical spine is catastrophic compared to something in the lumbar spine. And so you know what the mechanical testing is. You pick their worst testing protocols, which are usually their torsion testing and, a million cycles over several weeks' time. And as we made our initial design, we'd go through that mechanical testing, and at some stage the devices would crumple. And so then we go back to the drawing board, change the thickness of a strut by 0.2 millimeters, something that you don't even see, go back and test it. And through that process, we finally got a design where we could still have the low stiffness, low modulus, but we would pass all the static and dynamic testing for the FDA. So it's that balance of you can make devices that are really low stiffness and low modulus, but they don't pass that testing. And you've got to be able to pass that testing to get through the 510K process. So those 12 iterations were literally finding the sweet spot where we can pass that torture test, but still have the properties that we wanted.
And what about the 3D printing aspect of it? The porous titanium. It's probably a big part of the design, a big part of the efficacy of it. Just tell me about the advantages that additive manufacturing provide.
Yeah, so we use Oak Tree Additive, and they're a phenomenal 3D manufacturer. It's nothing fancy. There's porosity on the end plates. There's porosity on the sides as well. And my clinical practice, when I changed from PEEK to porous titanium, a short period of time, solid titanium, there seems to be better ingrowth. Some of it is thought to be ionic as well, and you've probably read about that the metals seem to do some stimulation of the osteoblasts in terms of producing bone. But I don't know what the right amount of porosity is, other than having porosity is better than not. So that's an important feature for bony ingrowth on the top and the bottom of the cage. And, I suspect someone said to me the other day, fusions look different now. In the old days when we did fusions, you'd get bone grown through the disc, bone grown around it. Sometimes I wonder what we're really getting is a locked fusion where we get bony ingrowth on the top, bony ingrowth on the bottom, and it locks it in that way. And I think that's the porous titanium feature that's coming. So nothing fancy about our 3D porous structure, but the fact that it's there, and I think it's an important feature to have in modern day interbody devices.
And you've combined advances in material with you have a very deep understanding of the biomechanics of the spine. Talk about that dovetail of knowledge coming together to create this technology.
I'm just a surgeon at the coalface, and I find nothing more frustrating than we fix patients and they come back and they have problems, and it's like, what could we have done? I don't think our device is fixing everything. I think it's an increment. And, there's genetic factors, there's lifestyle factors, there's technique factors, there's material factors. But I think if we can make an increment, if 5% of our patients have less subsidence, if their fusion rates go up by 5%, if 5% of them come back and they don't have adjacent segment disease, then I think there's a profound effect. So for me, it was really subsidence, fusion rates, adjacent segment disease. Can we change those? And I'll tell you an interesting anecdote. Medtronic had a product on the market called Peak rods, and Peak rods were plastic rods we used for lumbar fusions. And the whole rationale was the stiffness was the same as the stiffness of a fused segment without titanium. I used them for about 5 to 10 years, and my patients look great. The fusion rates were good. They didn't have that back pain that our standard titanium fusion patients have. And I'll credit Russ Knuckles, who did a lovely study on outcome of peak rod fusions in the lumbar spine, to give this idea of how stiff do we want our patients to be? And the answer is we don't want them stiffer than the bone that's there. We want it to fuse. So those peak rod cases and Russ Knuckles' early work from Loyola was really what tweaked me that stiffness is something that we just don't have a handle on yet, but I think it'll improve outcomes if we can match stiffness to the patient.
Well said. What have you heard from surgeons? You clearly have a knowledge of it. What have you heard from your surgeon users? Or
I mean, the surgeons have been amazing. It's like, when can we use this? They like the device. You put it in the hand. It's like, I want to use this tomorrow. And the analogy that I give surgeons and distributors is the devices that we're making, they're like light bulbs. So anyone knows how to put a light bulb in. The magic is inside the light bulb. And so the cervical cage is the first one we got clearance on. There's 7 other products coming behind it. Each of those products looks like every other device that's out there. So if you look at the ALIF standalone cage, it's a standard ALIF standalone cage. It's porous titanium. You can put screws through it. The magic is not in the structure, the insertion technique. That's all familiar to surgeons. And, as surgeons, the thing that we hate is, hey, I got a new product for you and you're going to have to change your workflow on how you use it. Whereas if you just say, you don't need to change anything, here's a new device, and if you start using it, do it the same way you do it before. It looks the same, smells the same, but it's not the same. So that's what surgeons like. So the response from surgeons has been phenomenal. The question is, when can we get our hands on it?
yeah, and along those lines, you mentioned you're expanding your portfolio. In the process of doing that now, what's the status on the rest of the products that are about to hit the market, and where do we stand?
So bear in mind, again, I'll give the full disclosure. I'm a full-time practicing spine surgeon. My biggest role is the next patient that I see. And right now we're doing a couple of things. Number one, the most important thing was proof of concept. Can we do this? Can we get an FDA clearance? Can we bring a device that is in that range of stiffness in the cervical spine? Done. The second question was, can we then take the 7 other products and can we conceptually transfer this low stiffness onto those? Done. The nice thing about those other 7 products is they're not finished. So as an example, if you look at an ALIF cage, does it need 3 screws or does it need 4? It depends who the surgeon is. But the ability to finally tweak it, we've kind of left open. So we're at this stage that we're producing inventory, getting our sets together. There are at least 3 strategics who are talking to us about partnering or acquisition. It's a process, and this is in the wheelhouse for quite a few large companies, and some of it is timing. But the ultimate goal is it's a full-fledged portfolio of devices that surgeons can instantly recognize. But the one feature that's built into them is that friendliness to the environment in bone with low stiffness. And I think with the FDA clearance of the first one, it really makes it much easier having a predicate device for the rest of them. The rest are prototyped, and they're on the drawing board for completion, testing, and then FDA clearance as well.
Great, and the Flexi was received FDA clearance in March, and you mentioned you're a full-time practicing surgeon,
Right.
and I need to ask about, and you're also an entrepreneur. So how do you what are the lessons you've learned during that process? There's a lot of people who might want to follow in your footsteps, follow the same pathway. What are some things you learned?
I hate to say it, I may stand out as a warning of what not to do. Uh, and the answer, it's interesting. In the old days, you hear about surgeons putting sketches on napkins and partnering with industry. And I think what I've noticed is a couple of things. One is a lot of consolidation in the industry, so there's just less companies out there. The second thing is a de-risking by industry. And by that, it's not enough to have a good idea. And so in the old days, you had a good idea, you wrote a patent for it, and industry picked it up and industry ran with it. Now you have to patent it, prototype it, test it, FDA clear it, and probably get traction in the market. And so the only thing that I've learned is it's a long road, and um, the appetite for risk out there is a lot higher than it was, and so it is challenging. I never figured I'd be taking a product into market and FDA clearance, but at the end of the day, I think it will help patients, and surgeons are asking for it. And so it's just a question of how we get there. I'm not a commercial mastermind, and so I don't pretend to be. I know the technology is good, and I know there's a desire for it. And now our next question is, what's the best way to bring it to market? And the only thing I would tell physician entrepreneurs out there is that um, you've got to kind of look ahead, because the time from when you get an idea to when you get it to market may be 10 years, and the market may have moved. And had the market not moved into porous titanium for us, then our product probably was too early. And so there's a lot of luck and timing with it. But if there's value to it, and I think it helps patients, then these products will generally see the life of day.
That's wonderful. And you mentioned the market. I just want to leave by asking you your opinion on the market. Biologics are playing a key part. You talked about navigation emerging as an important part. We hear about enabling technology being a key aspect of competing at the top of the market. But at the end of the day, as you said, screws and cages still matter. What are your thoughts on the current state of the market and where you see it progressing in the next 5 years?
It's kind of interesting, and I get in trouble for some of my comments. So, um, surgeons want choice.
Yeah.
And one of the difficult parts of enabling technology is use our software, map out your pathway, then use our robotic technology to put in our widgets, but you can't use somebody else's widgets. And so one of the challenges has been, as a surgeon, I don't want to rely on one company. I want to find the best product for cervical over here and lumbar over here, and inner body here and the cervical plate over here. Not one company doesn't have all the right products. So enabling technology for me puts us down alleys that we don't necessarily want to go. I think robotics is drill guides and nothing more than that. And it's heavy capital expenditure for something that's going to get out of date pretty quickly. If a robot was $100,000, we wouldn't even have the discussion. But when we're talking about 1 to 1.5 million capital purchases, they're pretty big and they get out of date. And I think that we're still looking at the equivalent of iPhone 1 for robotics. So robotics is just a guide. I think navigation is phenomenal, and navigation should be available to everyone. And there are a lot of companies that are working on agnostic systems, which I think is phenomenal, because then you can use anybody's nuts and bolts out there. Artificial intelligence, your guess is as good as mine. Custom implants play a role for a small number of patients, but it's harder. And I'll give you the example. The cervical cage that we developed, that we got approved for one level ACDF, there's 72 sizes. And I think for 99% of the population, 1 out of 72 sizes is going to work. And how they look when I've drilled everything out and flattened the bone out is not how they look on their x-ray. So I think custom implants play a role if you've got some sort of congenital hemivertebra or something. But the majority of normal people don't need them. So we're at an interesting transition point where the enabling technologies have to prove their value. Not sure that it's there yet. Operating times are longer. There's some data in orthopedic knees and infection rates may be higher. As we move to ASCs, you can't afford a robotic system. But as physicians, we still want to use what's best for our patients. And I think we still need innovation. One of the things I worry about, and I see this in orthopedics, is if you've only got 3 to 4 players, I think innovation gets stifled. And so the more companies out there, the better. As you know, J&J recently spun out or are in the process of spinning out, and they bought Expanding Innovations. That's what we need. VB Spine acquiring the spine portfolio from Stryker. That's what we need. We need more companies because then it promotes competition and then there's more innovation. And I hope that the conglomeration of orthopedic and spine companies is not the end game. We don't just need 2 or 3 companies. We need as many, a dozen companies that are fighting against each other, innovating, and surgeons need choice. They need to be able to pick what's best for their patients in their hands. And that may be from this company or this company or this company. But I really want to see if we can preserve that for surgeons and then for patients as well.
Well, that's well said, and we'll leave it there. And SpinePoint is getting in the fray. So congratulations on all your success, and we really appreciate your time today.
Dan, thank you so much for having me on, and I appreciate the invitation. Very humbled. Thank you.